open my personal.
No, you're not on Zoom, so somehow they cannot assign you as a host to the project. All right, sorry everyone. Since you're like, well, 10 minutes late. So let's get started from Shirley.
Okay.
And probably you can just see for that.
Yes. Yes. If I can.
Yes.
Yes. Thanks. I can share my screen too, right?
Why don't we just do this?
Okay. So everyone, could you see the screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So hello everyone. Sorry for the technical issue, and I'm postdoc from University of Arizona, and today I'm going to talk about our digitization work of the carbon dynamics in the community land model in Arctic and Polar region. So first of all, I would like to thank our collaborators who work on this project and provided a lot of constructive advice to make it work. So on this slide, the left figure shows a time series of the leaf air index at a global scale. The black line is from the default CIM BGC work run, and the blue line is and the green line is observation, which is the game CLI 3G does not. And it's clearly that CIM overestimates the leaf index at a global scale. And also we found in Arctic and Polar region, compared to the observation, CLM both estimates the leaf index and above ground biomass. And we know these two variables are very important in carbon dynamics. So what we want to do in our project is to simulate observation of leaf index and above ground biomass to force a model to match the observation, and then investigate the impact of adding such observation constraint to CLM on the impact of carbon, hydrology, and the energy cycle. Sorry. Okay, so in order to do that, we utilize a DAR CLM workflow, which is shown at this below diagram. So if we unplug the blue blocks away from this workflow and just run it, it is a normal ensemble CLM run. In which case we don't have any observation constraint to the model, and we call it as a free run. And if we plug the blue blocks back to the workflow and just run it, we call it a simulation run, in which case we simulate the observation plus the model to match the observation. So I'm sorry. In order, on the side of data simulation, we assume two observation types. So Chrissy, could you please mute yourself? Sorry. Okay, thanks. So on the side of data simulation, we assimilate two observation types. One is a multi-CLI, and the other one as one above ground biomass observation data set. And in the research file of CLM, we actually update all the vegetation carbon pool and the decomposition carbon pool in the research file according to the correlation in the simulation. And also we have some other settings for the dissimulation system. So after we simulate a leaf index and above ground biomass observation into CLM, the first thing that we found is that both these two variables decrease. So here you can see the time series of leaf index and above ground biomass. The orange line is from the free run, and the blue line is from the simulation run, and the green line is observation. So it's clear that this blue line is more close to observation. And for LAI in our simulation run, it is decreased by around 59%, and for biomass it is decreased by around 72%. And also you can see this from the spatial maps of these two variables. in the first row, you can see for both variables, they are highly overestimated, estimated in areas in this region compared to the observation, which is in the third row. And however, in our simulation run, you can see that those values are much closer, much smaller and close to the observation. And the second row and second result we found is that actually the carbon allocation is altered. I mean, though the absolute values of the vegetation carbon pool decreases, but that decrease is not proportion. So basically, the left figure, what left figure tells us is that such a kind in this animation in the free run where we don't have any observation constraint, it tells us okay, in this above region. For the vegetation, we have more leaves, more stem, and more root. But in our simulation run, first we decrease the amount of leaves, and then we decrease the stem carbon, and the relative ratio. And however, the relative ratio of the root actually is bigger compared to the free run. And since we decrease LEI and above-ground biomass, we also see a decrease in the GBP and ecosystem respiration, and such change actually results less carbon sink, less carbon sink into land. And the reason is that the ecosystem respiration is not decreased as much as the GBP. And if we decompose the ecosystem respiration, we get two components: the above ground respiration and the soil respiration. And if we look at the change of these two components, you will see that for the above ground respiration, it decreases a lot, but for soil respiration, it just doesn't. And at last, we use the international land model benchmark system, which is system to compare the land model results with various benchmark data set. And the left, basically the left table in general tells us our simulation actually makes the CLM has a better performance in carbon and hydrology cycle, but not for energy cycle. And we do have the results of the impact on ET, soil moisture, snow, albedo, and surface temperature. You can check out poster for more details. So I will stop here and welcome any question. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Shirley. Let's see if there's any. Maybe I should take a quick question from the chat box, and for the people here we can chat later. So we have a question for Aliyah saying it looks like you use the same initial spin-up file for 2011. So there's some transient behavior for a couple of years. Is there a way to redo the spin-out with the simulated biomass, or is that too computationally expensive?
Okay, so yes, thanks Leah for the question. For the spin up, actually, we started the initial condition file for present day initial condition, and then I don't know whether you noticed that we have 40 ensemble member, and we just use one ensemble member to spin out the model from the 2000 the initial condition, the default, and then ran it for. Over 1,000 a year, and also after that we did check. We also checked about the carbon equilibrium, and then in some area about we don't achieve that equilibrium, but yes, we can if we want to do a shortcut. We can just simulate biomass to get a better industry bio. Yeah, I think that's it.
I hope that answered part of the question. And Aliyah, you're welcome.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you. I was just wondering because it looked like in those graphs that you were showing initially, your lines were matching with the yellow, and then they were transitioning to match with the green later on. So I was wondering if that was a function of the initial spin-up file that you used.
That's behavior. That's actually the behavior of the data simulation system. It just works that way. It's just a gradual to large as a model simulation to agree with observation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we'll have a recorded presentation from Eli Young. who's unfortunately cannot be here today, and we'll just play her recorded presentation. Oh no, this is not.
Good morning. So in this talk, we are going to talk about using deep neural networks to map retrogressive fault lines in northern Siberia. Retrogressive fault lines are thermocast features in ice-rich hill slope permafrost terrain, and they are becoming increasingly frequent and dynamic in the warming Arctic. So understanding the spatial distribution of RTS is therefore becoming a crucial step to modeling carbon emissions into those permafrost soil. So our study here is currently focusing on northern Siberia, especially in the Yamal and the Gaidam peninsulas. And the mapping RTS in those regions is very challenging because the RTS in this area are much smaller than those from other parts of the Arctic. This is an example of a typical RTS in this region, and our goal is to train a machine learning model using satellite imagery to map these source lamps automatically. For each RTS training sample, we used RGB values, vegetation index, and digital elevation as inputs to the model. And for the training RTS labels, we have more than 300 training RTS labels that are collected from across the Yamal and Gaidam regions. And we also have 264 negative samples that resembles to the RTS, but actually not. And we also adapted training RTS labels from Nietzsche et al.'s paper in 2021 from a wider region in northern Siberia and also Canada to make a more generalized data. So this is what the training data looks like. Image A, B, C, and D are RGB image, vegetation index, relative DEM, and the shaded relief, respectively. So here, I'll briefly go through our data processing pipeline here. So the blue box is the process that we rasterize data from us engine to NumPy arrays. And then the red box is the process where we can train related processing, such as data splitting and augmentation. So we use the image augmentation techniques to enrich our training data set. It is a quite conventional approach for a small data set and proven to be very effective in reducing overfit and provide better model generalization. We applied a combination of alterations to the original image to make it look slightly different than the original image. This little variation is very useful to prevent the model to learn the exact same information in every iteration. We also used probability-based augmentation policy. So the number of possible augmentations in each iteration is tremendously increased. So this one shows our model training process with a UNet++ architecture. In our first training, the validation accuracy reached 0.79 with default training parameters. And then we manually adjusted the training hyperparameters and found the best combination that increased our validation accuracy by 1%. And finally, we tried the automatic hyperparameter tuning with a package called HyperOpt. It didn't increase our best validation accuracy. So far we have tested the 3 different model architectures. The first standard UNet++, we got 0.81 validation accuracy. And with the use of EfficientNet D7 backbone, we increased the validation accuracy by 1%. And the latest unit 3 plus, again, with the EfficientNet D7, can further improve the accuracy by 1% and finally reached 0.83. So that's our highest score. And here I show you some RTS predictions on the test data set. So the test data sets are never exposed to the model before testing. So they represent the model performance to the real world data. So the predicted RTS shape is very similar to the human verified labels. And most of them have very natural outlines, which means they are pretty good. So for those less accurate predictions, we found the prediction is mainly affected by the stabilization of the RTS with vegetation overgrowth. And where the label includes both active and more less active RTS, the model tends to recognize the more active ones. So for our future works, we would like to compare more types of differentiating architectures. For example, DeepLab Pro 3 and MaskRCNN. Also, we would like to enrich our data set by finding more RTS training examples. And also, this will be deployed on Pulse Engine for whole area inference. And also, finally, we would like to upscale the mapping region to across the entire Arctic.
All right. Yeah, we should. So yeah, Elise not here, and because of personal reasons. So, but I think you are free to contact him with his email that you can find on the About website if you have any questions or have any interest with that. So let's move to the next one. Ray Cheng from California Institute of Technology. And Ray, are you there?
Yeah. Do you mind me share my own screen, or you guys are?
Yeah, please do that.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you. I think it's on the screen now.
Okay.
Is it full screen? It looks good.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. So my name is Rachel. I'm a PhD candidate at Caltech. Thank you for the opportunity to let us present an ongoing project in my group. Our project's goal is to showcase some opportunities and constraints of assessing photosynthetic phenology across Arctic land cover types from space. Our motivation is because it's from the changing Arctic, especially we know the important role of vegetation in Arctic in terms of global carbon cycling. There have been an increasing trend in the greenness of canopy in the continental level in average. However, we definitely seen that the greenness of the canopy can be increasing or decreasing at the regional level from pixel to pixel. This indicates that the vegetation photosynthesis is inconsistently changed in the Arctic and also give us uncertainties when we want to estimate in the role of GPP in the global carbon cycling in the Arctic. Therefore, we want to know more about the GPP at the Arctic. However, there are very limited observation method on the ground level in this above domain, but actually the Arctic has a very complicated and diverse land cover types that is not observed by the flux towers, for example. And there are also land cover types that are unique to the Arctic that is not often seen at the lower latitude, which means are not really well understood yet. And also the Arctic surface topography adds another layer of complexity for the and for us to studying the vegetation GPP. Therefore, for all this diverse as well as heterogeneity, we want to monitoring the GPP using remote sensing, which give us a better spatial as well as temporal coverage. The conventional tool is using the reflectance, for example, the NDVI figure I show on the first slides. But NDVI value can only tell us the amount of energy being absorbed by chlorophyll. It doesn't really tell us how much of that energy is being used for photosynthesis, so that we won't get an accurate information in terms of GPP. An optimal tool currently nowadays more popular is using solar-induced chlorophyll fluorescence. It's a small amount of energy that being emitted by the chlorophyll. However, it can actually tell the partitioning between photochemical quenching as well as non-photochemical quenching. This is the information of light use efficiency. At the satellite scale, the remotely sensed SIF is approximately linearly correlated with the GPP. Therefore, we could build an empirical relationship between SIF and GPP using a scaling factor K. This is a foundation for modeling GPP using SIF empirically. And this is also the opportunity for us. More and more data sets are coming out, but the key to understand the GPP at the continental scale is using global scale data sets. For example, we have Tropomi SIF that give us the comprehensive view of the SIF globally. And in the meantime, we have this Fluxcom remote sensing machine learning GPP products. With these two products, we can build the empirical relationship for individual land cover types in the Arctic. And additionally, we have ground level measurements that can help us to validate whether these empirical relationships are good. So what we did is we plot the SIF data as well as the Fluxcom GPP data for each individual pixels and gather them by the land cover types. These are the hexabin data, and the scatters in each of these figures are our land cover, are our ground level measurements. We found that the machine learning GPP products sometimes are snow contaminated. This is a very big issue for the Arctic study. For example, we have high GPP value over winter time, although the data itself the GPP products were snow filtered when they were produced. Somehow this snow contamination can still go through it, and it needs a harder or stricter snow filter to eliminating it. And also another issue we noticed is that there is a large discrepancy between the flux tower GPP versus graded GPP products. It can be overestimated or underestimated, depends on which site you're looking at. This is really a limitation on these large scale machine learning products because we have so few towers. For future better prediction, we need more towers to validate and to improve the GPP products. And also heterogeneous land cover type is another constraint. But even within a small region or within one satellite pixel, the land cover types can be so diverse that will alter our results for this K factor. And I hope the resulted K factor will be a helpful tool for empirical modelers or the modelers in this group used to validate their data, their model, or help even validating our results. And this is still an ongoing work. Any feedback and comment is very welcome. And I want to acknowledge all our co-authors who have been producing this data and went to the field and to do the hard work. And thank you. If you have any comments, if I have time, I'm happy to answer here, or you can email me or ask me any question on Twitter. Thank you.
Right. Any question from chat box?
I didn't see that. I
Okay.
didn't see that.
Any question from audience here? Or
I have a question, actually. I think this is really cool to sort of think about function across the landscape by different land cover classes. How would you get to a better characterization of the land cover within those pixels if that's the big source of your uncertainty?
Yes, it is a big sort of uncertainty for our study. So right now, all east, like for each hex bin here is about 1 kilometer pixel size. And what we did is actually just to find what is the dominant land cover fraction within that 1 kilometer size, because our regional land cover type map is on the 30-meter resolution. And I agree with you, it's very complicated and also very highly uncertain, because even within this 1 kilometer size, let's say the evergreen is dominant land cover, sometimes the dominant fraction is less than 50%, which means you probably don't even want to call it a dominant land cover fraction type. And another uncertainty is when we comparing the crossing scales, the definition for land covers are different. Like for flux towers, the PIs call them based on the IGBP classification. This is already different from the land cover types we've used for above domain. And second of all, the footprint size of the flux tower is different from the 30-meter Landsat image products, and also definitely that will be different from the 1 kilometer resolution data sets. So these are all things we need to consider. So when we do modeling, I think it will be probably easier because we have more idealized situation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
That's
thank you
cool.
for the question.
So sorry, I have one question.
Yeah.
So what if you just directly use tower measure GPP and SIF to directly upscale the GPP to the regional? And with that approach, how do you think this kind of approach comparing to your approach using a FluxComp GPP as an intermediate product for your upscaling?
That's very unique question and also pointed on the sore point for our study. I didn't really mention the temporal coverage for our different data sets, but you may call it's not even apple to apple comparison. So for SIF and FluxCom, we have data from 2018 to 2019. And for flux towers, the data are way behind that. We don't even have a similar temporal temporal coverage. So the scatters we're showing here are more like a climatology, so multi-year average. That's why we could put them into the same figure. Otherwise, you're not looking at the same time period when you compare SIF and GPP. That's just the hardest point. And that's why we call FluxCom is more like a state of art, because that's the only data sets we can have the similar temporal resolution with SIF.
Awesome.
Okay, so I noticed there's one hand raised chat, and I don't know we have enough time for.
I think we have enough time. I just counted. We only have like 4 presentation left, and we still have almost an hour.
Okay, so I think you can unmute yourself, Dave.
Hi.
Hi, Dave.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
This is really cool. I had a couple of questions. One is just in response to the last piece. One approach that we took was to try and look at response variables. So whether or not we captured the same, response to light or temperature or something like that.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you had tried that approach and if that was helpful.
Yeah, that's exactly the same question I got asked from my committee member. We didn't do that. It's just because for this FluxCom remote sensing GPP, it has already embedded information, for example, surface temperature, leaf area index. So even we got some result, they're not independent. So it will have some relationship, of course. So it's expected. That's why we didn't do it. We could. But another thing I didn't have time to show up here is we actually included the topography of obviously for land cover types like evergreen forest and some more like herbaceous species that will cover a very large range of elevation. We see the change in K factor or scaling factor based on topography.
Cool. Well, and then my other question was, given the uncertainty of the land cover type,
Yeah.
could you create like a series of likely land cover types, and then just create a sort of a bound of uncertainty for the Eurosiv product? So assuming that this was dominant, but then it wasn't dominant and it was actually the secondary dominant, could you assume some sort of mixing, and then just create an envelope of possibilities? Because at the higher level, at the higher coarser resolution, that might be good enough for us to compare to Shuli's work that she just showed.
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, we have an envelope not for like secondary or primary, secondary land cover type. We do have an envelope for like uncertainty range for individual land covers. Actually, that envelope is already larger than the overall range of different land covers. The largest separation is between tundra versus non-tundra. That's what we can see, but that's a great point. I will think about it. There isn't really like how to say whether it's a primary or secondary, because it's already, for me, they're already secondary, because less than 50% is very small amount of fraction.
But you could apply your parameter to a list of assumed vegetation types, if you know what I mean, and then you'd have multiple estimates in the same place, and then you could make some envelope of uncertainty. I don't know. It would be great to see something that's different from Fluxcom, because we're facing the same issue, right? We're looking at comparing to Fluxcom, but Fluxcom already incorporates some information about MODIS, and so people are asking us, so, well, you should compare to the raw flux towers. I think that's a terrible idea, because the scale mismatch is so overwhelming that it doesn't work for us on our scales. But so there's no real truth. So having an uncertainty is expected, and this is a really promising and interesting idea of it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dave. Yeah, I'll think about that, and I think that's easy to implement. I'll also definitely try to plot something. I think the result will be interesting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Right. Okay. Yep. Let's move on to the next one. So if there's any question, so Ray, you can watch out the chat box. If there are any questions, you can probably respond in the chat box as well.
Sounds good. Thank you. Will do.
I've stopped. Okay. Looks like the next to me. I'll probably just use this well, screen. Well, yeah, so my presentation is more on the implication side. I'm interested in exploring the 21st century energy markets and its relationship to the uncertain terrestrial ecosystem carbon sink that we got from today's knowledge. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with this type of figures. It's adapted from the recent IPCC 6 access report. It shows you some mitigation strategy for the future climate change and the estimated costs and the potentials in 2030. And if we zoom in, we definitely see energy is on top of this chart. The energy market plays a big role in our future climate mitigation policies. So these type of figures or this kind of knowledges are typically generated by a family of models called integrated assessment models. And a typical example that a US-based model is called the Global Change Analysis Model, the GCAM. And for example, the future energy use can be affected by the scenario and by the atmospheric CO2 concentrations. For example, if we set 1.5 Celsius degree goal by the end of the 21st century, we have to control the atmospheric CO2 concentration. That means we need to reduce the emissions from fossil fuel use. And that means we probably want to use less traditional energy or more renewable energy. So in terms of land carbon sink, so these IAMs, integrated assessment models, considers land carbon sink in a global carbon cycle, but they do not take the uncertainty into account. Although we know there's huge uncertainty with that. For example, this results from the recent global carbon project. We see that the current land carbon sink is around 3 petagram carbon per year, but the uncertainty is almost at the same level. And so think about if we have more land carbon sinks, that means we have less pressure to reduce the fossil fuel emission. If we have less land carbon sink estimation, that means we probably have more urgent climate mitigation activities. So taking this uncertainty into the GCAM simulations will give us some useful information about this energy market or even food market, everything in response to this uncertain estimations of the land carbon sink. And we can quantify the economic value and socioeconomic values that our daily work in reducing the uncertainties of estimating the global land carbon sink. So basically what I did is using 11 vegetation models results from the trendy ensemble model into comparison project, and use the results from trendy and to calibrate or constrain the land carbon cycle module inside GCAM and do a bunch of global the GCAM simulations targeting at 1.5 degree climate goals. And finally, we just in this study, I just focus on the future energy market and the carbon prices that have been generated by using different training models. So here's the key results. So we see the CO2 emissions changes will go up and will drop down from energy sectors in terms of to reach the 1 point very ambitious climate mitigation goal. And we do see the CO2 emissions are different if we use different training models that in the GCAM model. And on the right side shows the energy use or the energy electricity production using a different training models. And these color bars and the shaded bars shows different renewable energy and the traditional energy. I'll skip that because of time limit, but we'll zoom in the coal power use or generation. So we see that, for example, if we use the LPX, that usually gives us less land carbon sink estimations. So we probably need to get rid of coal by the year of 2040. And if we use another model, the Surfx model, that typically gives us a higher land carbon sink in trendy estimations, so we probably only have to get rid of the coal until 2015. So there's like 15 year difference that make huge difference. And if you look into the energy system carbon price, then so we probably want to put a carbon tax in terms of for the carbon emissions in the future. So we see the carbon tax price, the carbon price is almost zero in current years, but when we want to apply those policies, so we see this carbon price was getting higher and higher, and by the end of 21st century, the carbon price can vary between $3,000 per metric tons carbon emissions to $5,000 just by using different models for estimating the land carbon sink. Oops. So finally, I just make a very simple linear regression. So if we just put the x-axis as the uncertainty of a cumulative land carbon sink in the 21st century per year. So that is 0.2 petagram and to 1.2 petagram carbon per year. And on the y-axis, we have the carbon price in 2100, still in US dollars per metric ton in 2010 prices. That means we don't consider the inflation rate. So we see, oh, I'm sorry, there's a mistake. There should be a point here between 165.9. So we see that every reduction of 0.1 petagram carbon per year, the NPP uncertainty could reduce uncertainty of the 2100 carbon price by 166 ton per CO2 emission. So that means if you think about our current days fossil fuel emission is 9.5 gigaton carbon. So translating into dollars, it will be $430 billion. It's a huge market, and that means a lot to the industrial community and the enterprises. And I think that that reflects the value of daily work has been working on, and that's why I told audience yesterday that our salary should be raised of employers. In summary, our estimation of land carbon sink is highly uncertain and large economic values by reducing the land carbon sink uncertainty. And in the future, we're focusing on just reducing the uncertainty of land carbon emissions in the or sink in the above domain, and that can contribute a lot to reduce this uncertainty.
Question?
Yeah. Any questions, chat box? Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, Peter.
The uncertainty between those models and the current land carbon sink, a lot of that is related to how they handle land use and land cover change. Because the observed land sink, if you lump land use, land cover change and the land sink all together, is pretty well constrained by observation, just that we don't really know how much land cover land use is happening. So because GCAM includes those dynamics of land cover and land use change as part of its trajectory, I just wonder, is there a way to kind of just from GCAM itself to mechanistically pull apart that question of, you know, what's really driving this uncertainty and how much is the range of uncertainty that you get, say, in carbon prices at 2100 bigger or smaller than if you did kind of an internal exploration of the GCAM uncertainty? Is that?
Yeah, I understand that. So first of all, the trendy simulations that I took doesn't consider, I mean, these model simulations, they have different phases. Like the phases that I use, the model that don't simulate land use, land cover change effects. So that's like the internal model of uncertainties for the training models. And in GCAM, you probably know that there's a climate model called Hector embedded. So the Hector is totally uncoupled, decoupled from the land use, land cover change module in GCAM. So I would think if we do this land use, land cover change, have some feedbacks into the Hector, so I would say that the uncertainty probably be larger.
Be larger, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
All right. No, okay, great. So I can save some time. Let's move to the next one. I think it's Meng Duo. Meng, would you share your screen or do you want me to share my screen?
Maybe you can share your screen.
Okay. That's fine. Yeah. Okay, here we go.
Hello, everyone. I'm Meng, a first-year graduate student from Professor Ming Chen's group at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In the past year, I have been interested in the future land use and land cover change in the above domain and its impacts on the terrestrial carbon cycle. Next slide, please. We all know land use and land cover change is a key link between human and Earth system. Predicting future ecosystem change needs the input of graded LULCC projections, which are typically from the regional projections from integrated assessment models and spatial disaggregation models to downscale them into graded scale that can be used in terrestrial biosphere models. An important possible uncertainty source in this process, but has been ignored, is the uncertainty introduced in the downscaling process. Next slide, please. With that, set up a modeling experiment that used two different spatial LULCC downscaling methods. One is FLAS and the other is estimator to generate 0.25 degree graded LULCC data based on the same regional projections from a widely used integrated assessment model, GCAM, under the SSP126 scenario, basically the strongest mitigation scenarios in the future years. Then the generated two sets of graded LULCC data are used to drive the community land model version 5 to simulate the carbon cycle in the above domain. Next slide, please. And due to the time limits, I just want to quickly show some of our preliminary results. The left figure shows the map for the 18 planned function types over the above domain in 2015. And on the right, we see forests will expand and offset the area of shrublands in the future decades in the above domain under the SSP126 scenarios. Note this LULCC is purely driven by socioeconomic factors, not due to the ecosystem dynamic. And next slide, please. And here are several most evident examples on the differences of the LULCC data by the end of the 21st century, produced with two different models with the same GCAM input. The first two columns show the result from FLAS and Demeter respectively, and the third column shows their difference. Let's focus on their difference. We see the FLAS and Demeter produce spatial distribution of needle-leaf evergreen boreal forest and broadleaf deciduous boreal forest don't match with each other. And next slide. Next slide, please. And so for the broadleaf deciduous boreal forest and C3 Arctic grass as well. And next slide, please. Based on that, we do have differences in the spatially averaged CLM projected future gross primary productivity and net ecosystem exchange changes in the above domain, also not huge. And next slide, please. But the spatial differences of CLM estimated GPP and NEE are large. We see the GPP differences could be as large as 500 gram carbon per year at some location and 200 gram carbon per year for NEE. And next slide, please. In summary, we may expect more forest and fewer shrub in the future over the above domain under the SSP126 scenario. And different spatial downscaling methods could lead to the large difference in the spatial pattern of LULCC. These differences in the LULCC lead to obvious discrepancies in the spatial pattern of GPP and NE. If you have any question, okay.
Yep. Is there any question, chat box? No. Any audience questions? Okay. Yeah, we'll move to the next one and see if there any question popping up, so we can, if we can, get it answered at the end of presentations. Our next speaker is, sorry. Yeah, do you want to present?
No, I recorded it.
Recording, okay.
I thought folks could watch it anytime then.
Right.
I'll just have to suffer through
Nice.
hearing myself speak.
Okay, yeah, Colin's here, but it's watch the recording, but you're available for question.
I'm happy to
answers.
answer.
Yeah. It's quite annoying.
Oh, it doesn't tell you.
Oh man. How can I move it somewhere?
Move it. Maybe. There you go.
All
Is that
right.
the right one?
Okay, let's enjoy Colin's recorded presentation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Colleen Iverson. I am a distinguished staff scientist and ecosystem ecologist at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I'm in the Environmental Sciences Division and Climate Change Science Institute. Thanks for letting me join your meeting. I'm excited to tell you more about the NG Arctic project, and I'm also excited to learn more about all of the very cool science that folks are doing within the ABOVE program. And I'm very excited to be here in person. Supported by the Biological and Environmental Research Program within the Department of Energy's Office of Science, the overarching goal of the Next Generation Ecosystem Experiments in the Arctic, or NG Arctic project, is to advance our understanding of the rapidly changing terrestrial Arctic. And this is by combining boots on the ground observations with the predictive power of Earth system models. The Department of Energy has asked us to deliver a process-rich model that extends from the bedrock to the interface between plants and the atmosphere, where we can track the evolution of Arctic ecosystems in a changing climate and model it at the scale of a high-resolution Earth system model grid cell. Led by Stan Wilschlager at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the multidisciplinary NG Arctic team spans nearly 150 scientists across 5 institutions. And those include ORNL, Berkeley Lab, Brookhaven National Lab, Los Alamos National Lab, and the University of Alaska Fairbanks. We have task leads that span questions across the project as well as institutions, and we are very lucky to have an excellent science advisory board giving us advice on how to proceed. To allow us to better understand the rapid changes occurring in tundra ecosystems across space and time, the NG Arctic project is organized around 6 discovery science questions that span gradients of topography, permafrost, vegetation, and hydrology. These science questions span scales from microbial activity to landscape evolution and include a new cross-cutting question on disturbance impacts. The questions have been selected with input from the broader research community to address critical uncertainties in our understanding of tundra ecosystems, and also to align with improved process representation in the land surface model of DOE's E3SM Earth system model. We've investigated these science questions in a phased approach, beginning in 2012 in phase 1 on the north slope of Alaska, and expanding our field sites in phase 2 to include warmer sites on the Seward Peninsula. And then in phase 3, we've added depth and breadth to our research questions across both the North Slope and the Seward Peninsula. At these sites, we have access, instruments, and infrastructure that enables our team to conduct research safely and efficiently, working across this north-south gradient of environmental conditions. The field sites that we established in phase 1 and 2 of the project were really facilitated with help from the University of Alaska, DOE programs, including ARM, and native corporations that have been central to our success. Our discovery science informs the development of 6 model modules that span model scales and processes from inundation to vegetation dynamics, each evaluated against multi-scale measurements. Within the NG Arctic project, we're committed to a culture of safety and security. And as we intentionally and continuously work to develop that culture as a foundation for cross-cutting and collaborative science, One of our pandemic activities has been to share our lessons learned on building the safe and secure project culture with the broader scientific community through articles and outreach, tabletop exercises and surveys, and discussing within the project priorities for the coming year to continue this intentional development of project culture. In addition to intentionally developing this culture of safety and trust in team science, we've also found other ways to collaborate across disciplines. For example, we implemented open and fair data policies early in the project, and more than 130 NG Arctic data sets can be publicly and freely accessed through the NG Arctic data portal. We also have integrated questions that cut across both observations and models. And we like to bring modelers to the field with us because modelers can help us to understand key model needs and at the scale and better understand the scale of measurements and how they'll be predicted across the Arctic land surface. Our thanks to the broader NG Arctic team. Here is a photo from our recent virtual all hands meeting in February of this year, where we got to hear great science and also play Arctic tundra categories. We welcome opportunities for collaboration with partners across the Arctic. Our thanks to the Department of Energy's Biological and Environmental Research Program for supporting the NG Arctic project for all of these years. And heartfelt thanks to the Native corporations for their guidance and for allowing us to conduct our research on the traditional homelands of the Inupiat people, including UIC Science on the North Slope, as well as the Bering Straits Native Corporation, the Council Native Corporation, Mary's Igloo Native Corporation, and the Sitnasuk Native Corporation outside of Nome.
Thank you. You have any questions about the topics? Okay. Circling, and actually we have a lot of discussion in the breakout room on the carbon cycle and wetland session this morning, and talk about the scale mismatch between the measurement and the model, and the strategies of integrating model and data together. I know Peter talked about that a lot yesterday. And yeah, could you, I'm not sure if some audience is not in that breakout room. Could you introduce about the
I'll
strategy?
take a crack at it first and then Peter can talk about it. And we've got Bob Bolton here too, who's part of the project. So from my perspective, I'm a plant ecologist. The ELM, the land model, actually has plant functional types in it already, right? So it has sort of the mechanism for incorporating some measurements. I happen to study roots, so it doesn't do a very good job with the sort of below ground part yet, right? But that's where my measurements of allocation or Alistair's measurements of photosynthesis or, you know, like VC max can go directly into the model already, right? Yep. But other measurements, sort of microbial dynamics or vegetation dynamics, those sorts of things aren't, the model's not really ready yet to accept them. And I think that's the place where sort of scaling strategy that Peter talked about comes in.
Yes, so they do have a one question, I mean, in the auditorium room today, this morning, and they kind of asking the question like how the small scale, like a fine scale observation can be used for the model, how to bridge what they observed at a fine scale with the model. That's something from their side, those people who are working on the fine scale, they want to know the observation they have at fine scale, how that could contribute to the modeling.
I can tell you one from an empirical perspective, and then maybe Peter. So the model can be run sort of at any spatial scale, right? So like we can run a point version of our hill slope where we've made measurements, right? So I can measure the allocation of a PFT and directly parameterize the model with that. But then what we need is the sorts of things that above is doing. If I know what this PFT is doing in this space, I need to know where that PFT is across the landscape. And I need to measure allocation or VC max in a couple of places to make sure that PFT is doing what I think it's doing in different places on the landscape. So like that's a plant-centric answer, but whether
like the I'm sorry Peter, like the microbial activity, I mean, except for the spatial scale, except for the spatial scale, like the station, we also have some activities that, happen at more short time scale. And whether a model, we know that the temporal resolution of the model is like 30 minutes in time interval. And some activity, if happen, within, a shorter time scale, but that kind of process actually not represented in a model. And some people, they do such kind of observation work, and they kind of have this kind of sort of question. We have a scale that might be not measured in a model, and how we can deliver this kind of knowledge to fine skills.
So the mismatch of spatial scale is a different problem than the mismatch of temporal scale that you were just bringing up. And I think we have two different approaches for trying to tackle that. On the temporal scale part, you're right, the fundamental time step for the CLM or ELM is about 30 minutes. You can go longer than that. You can go shorter than that. But when you look at the biogeochemistry reactions that are being solved for in ELM or in CLM, there's really no benefit to going finer than that half-hour time step, because it's not actually resolving a coupled system of kinetic equations. And so to solve that problem, we're using a new model that's the p-Floatran reactive transport model that actually does, it will cut the time step as necessary to come up with a solution for aqueous phase chemistry that's engaging dozens of different reactions at once, including potentially microbial kinetics and reactions in that matrix of reactions.
Okay.
So that is being coupled directly into ELM, and will essentially just short circuit or remove the need for the current ELM, say aqueous phase biogeochemistry. And so that's one thing.
Okay.
That should help a lot for the kinds of questions that you're talking about on temporal scale.
Okay.
The spatial scale is a different problem. That was more what I was talking about yesterday, where the combination of fine scale models that we can run offline to generate parameterizations for, say, intermediate scale models that then we can run offline to generate even coarser parameterizations for the ELM scale model that then relies on the deeply nested subgrid hierarchy, subgrid heterogeneity mechanism in that model to try to capture those modes of variability. That's the, in a nutshell, how we're trying to solve that spatial scaling problem.
Can I answer that from an empirical point of view too? I think that's why it's so useful to have empiricists work closely with modelers, because you can tell us, we can tell the modelers what the most appropriate level of aggregation is, right? And also provide validation data from flux towers or something to see if is it enough to have a 30-minute time step and like larger spatial scales, right? Like we provide data that provides bounds, and we can also provide short-term small scale data and test whether at the scale the model is measuring it, that it's aggregating it in a way that we find to be scientifically valid. I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks for this great discussion. Yeah, let's move on to our, I think it's last presentation today. It's Leah.
Yeah, I
Leah?
also, can I just add quickly to the discussion, because I was really enjoying it. And we are thinking about doing similar microbial upscaling with carbonyl sulfide. So I'm working with Laura Meredith on her above project, and we use the simple biosphere model, which is similar to ELM. And we have PFTs and we have tiling within grid cells and so forth. And we have a bunch of measurements now at different sites across the Arctic where we've been looking at carbonic anhydrase activity, carbonic anhydrase being the main enzyme that's involved in carbonyl sulfide, in both soils and vegetation. And we are thinking about upscaling by biomass essentially, because we have carbon pools in SIB4. And so that's going to be the first thing that we try, I think, to try to connect like the microbial small scale with what's going on at the plants to hopefully get a better idea of, how that translates into then carbonyl sulfide fluxes at tower sites.
Very cool. I love the plant soil connection. We've been thinking about that with sort of mycorrhizae as well, right? Sort of how we
Yeah,
get that.
Laura's got like more intense stuff in her project in terms of like, sampling the DNA of fungi and trying to get like way more microbial stuff. But I've been thinking a lot about how to tie those field measurements to the modeling that I do. And so we're struggling with those same things as well. Yeah.
Awesome.
Aaliyah, does that SIB4 implementation have nutrient dynamics as well?
No, it doesn't. We have CO2 fertilization, but we don't have damping by nutrient dynamics. So that is something that we need more manpower to work on.
Yeah, the microbial plant connections, in my opinion, you really have to consider those nutrient dynamics because that's most of what's going on there is that competition between them for available nutrients. So
sure, but just coming back to the point about empirical scaling, we're thinking of, so if we have a whole bunch of flux measurements that can be connected in the lab to the amount of carbonic anhydrous activity in a given soil or vegetation core, then knowing something about the biomass content of that, can we then scale it using the biomass in SIB4? It's a really simple empirical connection that we're proposing at this point.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, very cool.
Okay. So, Aaliyah, do you want to share your screen?
Yeah,
or
I
do you
can. I think you guys need to stop sharing. Oh.
Yep.
Okay. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So thanks a lot for this session. I really enjoyed the discussion. So thank you very much for hosting this. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about our attempts to look at the high latitude carbon seasonal cycle with a couple of different modeling approaches. So just some background, we know, I think it's well known at this point, that there has been an increasing seasonal amplitude of carbon fluxes at various sites across the above domain and in Alaska. And this paper by Heather Graven et al. In 2013 demonstrated that the seasonal cycle, this is what I'm showing here is the detrended CO2 seasonal cycle for the early 2010s versus back in 1916. You can see larger seasonal cycle at Barrow versus at Mauna Loa. And so the hypothesis is that this is connected to terrestrial biogeochemistry, but what actually drives these amplitudes in the modeling side, and whether we can reproduce that in order to then predict what's going to happen in the future, is something that's not fully decided. And so this paper by W. Hunsinger, they proposed there's a bunch of different factors like climate, land cover change, CO2, and nitrogen deposition, we're just talking about nutrients, and so forth. And so you can see that all of these different models that are listed over here, the red is supposed to be the net land uptake. Depending on which model you pick, the net land uptake can change quite a bit and can be attributed to a bunch of different things. So we thought we'd step back and try to get a handle on this. And the model that we are using, this is part of Lei Hu's Above Phase 2 project. So I'm a research, I should have said it, people who don't know me, I'm a research scientist at NOAA's Global Monitoring Lab, and I've been working with Lei on this project. And so the model that we're working with is the polar version of the vegetation photosynthesis respiration model, which some of you may be familiar with. So we are using AER5 reanalysis climate data to get our temperature scaling factors and PAR. It is essentially a light use efficiency model, but we are using SIF from the C-SIF product that was that's been generated and shared with our group. And then we are using tower eddy covariance data. And so you can see this map down here. The red stars are indicating all of the different eddy covariance sites that we've incorporated into this study. And then the histogram over here shows you the distribution across the different vegetation classes, noting, of course, that the distribution is asymmetric and we are not evenly distributed across vegetation types, let alone spatially. But I'm still going to go ahead and show you the results from using this limited data set, because it is quite a valuable data set of NEE. And then assuming that this methodology works, and we think it does, we can then spatially extrapolate it using carbon trackers NEE product, and essentially to try to partition what we think is a synthesized NEE product from the carbon tracker, because that optimizes the biospheric fluxes, and then try to partition that eventually. So I'm just going to show you some preliminary results from the training. So this is showing two vegetation types that are quite common in the above domain: tundra and North American evergreen needle-leaf forest. I should have mentioned that here we split the evergreen needle-leaf type into anything in Eurasia versus anything in North America, just because the climate regions are quite different and we get different parameter matching depending on if we split the climate regions. So we fit the respiration and the GPP with daily data. So the 30-minute data from the eddy covariance towers can be quite noisy. And so we found compositing this to daily actually improved our statistics. And so we used the nighttime median values during the summer, as well as the daytime non-growing season values. And the growing season is indicated by a CSIF threshold. So we're basically using solar induced fluorescence as our proxy for whether or not GPP is happening. And then the additional thing we did was we split our GPP parameterization into two parts of the season. So this comes from a paper that Lei published in PNAS last year that showed that if you split the GPP into two different portions of the year, so anything essentially pre-July and post-August, you actually do get better resolution if the GPP in the paper that she published, they get better comparisons with some other GPP products. So we did the same thing here where we split it. And so you can see in general, except for there's a bunch of high outliers that we don't match, but our statistics are overall quite good. We have generally very low normalized mean bias, high R's, and high national subgroup coefficients. So then we can extrapolate this to look at the composited, what the tundra domain looks like. And to do this, so I'm fitting eddy covariance tower sites, but then I use the IGPP land cover classification map to then grid up to 1 degree in Transcom essentially. And we can look at these sites compositively. And in general, we get the summer uptake reasonably well. The R's are 0.6 and higher, which in geoscience is not a bad thing, but and they're significant, but we have problems with wintertime because there's just limited data. And so fitting the respiration parameters, particularly in the wintertime, is difficult. So we're still struggling a little bit with that. So we decided to focus just on analyzing the growing season for now, because at least those numbers look more reasonable. And so if we compare it to some of these carbon tracker optimized products that I mentioned, so I'm showing here the monthly mean NEE from Carbon Tracker 2019b, which is the latest public release version of Carbon Tracker, and then Carbon Tracker Lagrange, which is a more specifically North American focused optimized model. We generally get, the timing of the uptake right, and then within the uncertainty shading over here, which is the 20th, 80th quantile, we overlap with the magnitude of the Indian and North American domain. And then in the Eurasian domain, we actually do better. Our polar VPRM matches pretty well with the Carbon Tracker 2019b NE estimates in Eurasia, which is encouraging. And we don't have Carbon Tracker Lagrange in Eurasia at the moment. So that's one thing. So then we can go ahead and look at the GPP changes over time, because that's what we were interested in looking at, whether the seasonality changes in the high Arctic can be attributed to terrestrial biogeochemistry. And what we see is if we look at the first 5 years of the early 2000s versus the last 5 years leading up to 2020, we do see early growing season onset, more peak uptake during the summer months. And this is both in the Transcom North American region, as well as the Eurasian boreal region. And you can see by the magnitudes of the Eurasian region, obviously, because it's a larger amount of area there contributes higher overall flux. But the interesting thing is that the relative change in North America from the first 5 years of the 20-year period we were looking at to the last 5 years, the increase in North America is significantly larger than it is in Eurasia. And then also finally, I want to point out that our estimates of GPP from this really simplified light use efficiency model that does a little bit of tiling and incorporates as much site level data as we can get our hands on actually matches reasonably well with these estimates that Lei published in that PNAS paper I was talking about. So our peak magnitudes fit kind of right in over here. And so that's encouraging that, despite all the complications we've heard today about, minute pixel level details, that maybe some of this higher level synthesis can actually give us some ideas about, what is going on with the terrestrial biogeochemistry. So the next thing we're going to do is use these estimates of COS-based GPP that Lei has published in this paper, as well as the Carbon Tracker Lagrange NEE product, to try to partition those and see how that then we can extrapolate and get parameters for all of these different pixels So that's the nice thing about Carbon Tracker is that it's an integrated synthesis product that covers every single pixel in this domain. And it's based on, tons of observations, both at the surface as well as aircraft data. And so we think that these Carbon Tracker products are kind of like a synthesis NEE product that we can then go ahead and try to partition and spatially extrapolate to Eurasia to look at changes in terrestrial biogeochemistry. So thanks. Feel free to email me. I'm sorry I'm not in Alaska with you guys, but happy to take questions if we have time.
Any questions popping up in the chat box? Any question from you?
I have a
Yeah.
quick question. If
Yeah, David.
that's really interesting again. Thanks for that. So again, this is what's cool is like there's another sort of independent type of GPP estimate. What's interesting about this one is it's at the lower end of those modeling pieces. And what Shuli showed earlier on was that if you assimilate the LAI, you do pull down the GPP quite considerably in the region. And I'm really interested to know, like, oh, okay, well, how does it compare with Shuli's numbers? Because we didn't present it in this way. I don't know if I remember. Shuli might know whether or not she might recognize whether or not these numbers are more similar or less similar. But it's really interesting that you're also finding something that's on the lower end of this model bound.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but the FluxCom product is the cyan line in here, and we're kind of right there, or maybe just a little bit above. This is not exactly the same time period. I think lay average 2000, the middle of the period for the 20 years. So it's not exactly the same, but we're kind of in the same ballpark, given our change between 20 years is, not that much. I'd be interested to see what numbers you guys end up with for sure. But, I think that the reason that we're getting what we're getting is because our driver is CIF essentially. So CIF is the main, I didn't go into detail about how this optimization is done, but it's essentially a hyperbolic fit using CIF, and we fit these, everything that's outlined in red is a parameter that we're fitting for every single vegetation type that we can fit to. And so CIF is the primary thing that goes into this GPP parameter fit for lambda and par naught. And so if that CCIF product that we're using can be related to LAI, as you were mentioning, then yeah, I think there's reason to expect that the numbers should be similar. So this is the cool part though, is like, CIF gives us a really nice integrator as well. And then we have all this independent integration from Carbon Tracker, and they seem to agree. So I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, the one thing was raised in a review that we're dealing with right now in another paper using the same system that Shuli presented on was, there's this FluxCom has LAI in it, or essentially has the same data as LAI, right? It has the modus, it's driven by some sort of modus NDVI translation to LAI. And so finding independent agreement between things that do have that sort of modus LAI as their base versus things that are not have that at their base is interesting. But
yes, which is why Carbon Tracker is really interesting, because that is a completely independent top-down model. So yeah,
super cool. Awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and I'm happy to be here, or rather, be virtually here.
Yeah, me too. I'm happy to be here too.
Leah, just a quick question.
Yeah.
I know the original form of VPRM, the calculation of GPP is using EVI rather than CIF.
Yes.
Has anyone in your group did a comparison between the original form of the performance original form of VPRM and the CIF?
So I would refer you to the Christina Lewis's 2017 paper, because she did comparisons between EVI and CIF in that paper. And that was the one that we worked off to say that we would pick CIF as our product, because she showed that the CIF product actually gives better agreement compared to using EVI.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Alea, if you have it to hand, could you just send me the link or the author? I just missed the link.
Oh yeah, sure. The reference. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes, I will email it to you, Dave. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
I had a question that I think is both for Shuli and Leah about the leaf area index information. So I was surprised looking at your map from the MODIS leaf area index that the peak LAIs for the boreal forest region are less than 2 and pretty close to 1. That seems wrong to me. That seems too low by a factor of 2 or 3. So I'm just curious about that. I was just doing a little bit of poking around to see if there's like more recent ground-based LAI estimates for boreal forest than what I remembered. And I'm finding things that are pretty recent that show typical values for like the northern old black spruce site of 3, 4. Yeah, I mean, it's that just surprises me, and I wonder if that's right, and does that strike anybody else as a low number?
I'll let Shuli take this because I haven't looked at LAI. It's not something that we consider for VPRM.
If you could share my slide here,
Okay.
and then so everybody can just have a look at that visual.
Oh. It's in my-
While we're pulling that up, Josh, I have a question for you as well. I'm curious to know if the above land benchmarking modeling system is more user-friendly at this point. I know it derives from ILAM, but I would really like to use both ILAM and the above benchmarking system at some point.
Right, that is very, for example, like in Fairbanks, those values are very low, maybe, lower than 2, right? Lower than 2. And this observation is from the MODIS LAI. And actually in above region, for MODIS LAI, it actually doesn't cover this area in the winter or springtime. It has very limited observation in winter or spring. Further southeast region it has some. And this figure you should see here, I just integrate the available observation in summertime and onto this map. So basically, for example, in Fairbanks, this area, I think that value represents the summertime. So I don't know why. The value is just so low, but that's the information I know is that on this map, the LAI, in Fairbanks, this area, it's from it's just around the summertime because that's when the satellite have observation here. So.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense that I'm really thinking about the peak LAI as much as for spruce, anyhow, the peak LAI is not that different in the summer and the winter.
With my limited knowledge, probably the MODIS LAI retrieval algorithm might be biased for this boreal forest because these trees, we can see that the leaves are more clumped than the temporal trees.
Yeah, I wonder about that. I mean, if that's the case, then the assimilation that you're doing, which is essentially shifting toward below ground carbon allocation and reducing the leaf carbon allocation in order to, changing that sort of above ground to below ground allocation to reduce the leaf area to match the MODIS observations.
Right.
It is a way to get that answer, but is it the right answer? It'd be nice to
question. Just a question, Peter. Do you think so? The one note is that the MODIS data here that we're showing is aggregated to a pretty coarse spatial scale. So I guess the question in my head is MODIS biased at this coarse scale, right? Is it a scale issue, or does anyone know whether or not MODIS is biased at the site level? You know, are we mixing things that are lower, or if you picked a 1 kilometer spot, would you still see the same bias?
Yeah, I don't know. It's been a long time since I looked at the MODIS, like high res 1 kilometer or 500 meter data to see. But there's certainly enough. I don't know what resolution we're looking at here.
This is a 25 kilometer.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it seems like the boreal forest in a lot of places is dense enough that in 25 kilometers, you'd be seeing mostly uninterrupted forest. Maybe not a lot of places. I don't know.
So how come there's such a big seasonal swing though? Josh, didn't you just mention that the LAI for spruce doesn't drop as much in the winter, or does it?
It's actually the MODIS AI, it has the biggest coverage in this region in summertime, maybe starting from maybe June to October, I think, June to October, that you can see in the MODIS AI actually cover this area. But in wintertime, from maybe November to April, those LAI observations just available in the southeast, in the far southeast region. And for the rest of this area just have no available LAI observation.
Okay, so as modelers, we need to tell them, I need more respiration flux data from people on the ground in the winter. You need more LAI data from people on the ground.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I think keeping. I know it's sort of, for their simulation experiment, you can set the uncertainty range for your observation. So it's met with quantification of the uncertainty of your LI data. It's probably a critical.
Yes, are you asking about the uncertainty?
Yeah, how do you estimate the uncertainty of the MODIS?
I think MODIS, I'm
Provided.
Yeah, MODIS provided the uncertainty related to its observation. It related to its retrieval. So we still don't have any information where it doesn't have the available.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that uncertainty probably need to be propagated through the aggregation. So when you aggregate 500 meters, 25 kilometers.
I wanted to quickly follow up about this benchmarking because it's come up in a couple of our talks now, including Ruiz. Can folks comment on whether there's a good way for us to get started on either the ILM or the above benchmarking system if we don't have any expertise and nobody down the hall we can talk to?
Peter, I think why not?
Well,
I think because I know that when I'm using the ILM system, I kind of remember you provide like a benchmark data set in the ILM related to carbon. I remember, if I remember correctly from the NetCF, the information that
I think we probably need to stop this session. It's already on time now. And we can continue.
Okay, that's just the first
discussion later. Peter, would you mind to?
No, that's
start that. Okay, thank you everyone. It's a great discussion and a great session, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. And feel free to contact the presenters if you have any questions. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay.
Dave, I'd be super curious to know how you guys got started with it though.
Yes, she did it really easily.
Okay. All right, that sounds great. I just also, I know that there is a specific above benchmarking modeling system that folks are pushing. So is that just built off of ILM?
I don't know about that, but I do know about ILM, and I can just say that if you are interested in getting some training on how to begin using it, then I can put you in touch with the right people because it's coordinated out of ORNL.
Okay, super. I'll email you, Peter. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
That was super interesting.
Thanks.
Bye, Dave. Bye, Josh.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Whenever you want.
Oh, no, you're right.